Amazing. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you are all doing well this Wednesday afternoon. And thank you so much for joining us today in this webinar, building a thriving team. So for this afternoon, we will be having with us one of Quintegral's very own facilitator and coach. He is a certified Chali talent analyst, a certified NLP practitioner, and of course, a certified EI or emotional intelligence practitioner. We have here this afternoon Mr. Kelvin Salas, who will be facilitating this afternoon's workshop. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, yes.
Good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Yes. Anyone who would like to open their microphones and just say a hi before we start
Hello,
our
good
session?
afternoon.
Good
Hi, good
afternoon.
afternoon.
Good
Great.
afternoon.
Amazing. Thank you. It's great to
Good
hear some
afternoon.
voices in this room. Okay. So without further ado, I would like to start our topic on how to actually build a thriving team and to discuss more about understanding diversity and inclusion's role actually in the workplace. And with that, I believe that Ali has shared who I am as part of this program. So again, my name is Kelvin Celis. I'm part of the Quintegral's list of AMA facilitators. And I have been a facilitator coach for over 16 years, and I have a lot of experience when it comes to organizational development, leadership development, and program design. I am a certified NLP master practitioner. I'm also a certified emotional intelligence practitioner by Genos, and I'm a certified Chali talent analyst. Something that is not added in this specific bio is that I am also a shared leadership coach by Leadership in Motion, which focuses a lot on team coaching. And one of the important topics we have is actually how to build a thriving team. So our agenda for the next probably half hour or 40 minutes is for us to quickly share with you an insight or topics about diversity and inclusion, for us to understand a quick idea of what are the dimensions of diversity, our idea of perception. How does perception affect our way of looking at things? Um, a little bit of topics on culture, um, values, and of course, one of the most popular topics when it comes to DIE is the differences in generations. Talking about how our biases affect the way we look at things, um, culture as well. And the last is regarding empathy and how can we actually use empathy to improve or create a thriving team. Moving forward, we really wanted to share with you how important the definition of diversity is. So diversity and inclusion is actually defined by a presence of differences within a given setting in the context of people. It's not just how the organization works or the process that the organization has, but it also focuses on the context of people itself. It includes a variation of what? Number one, it's race. Second is ethnicity. Third can be about gender. Fourth is age. Fifth is when we look at religion. The next one is a person's ability in actually doing things or speaking or thinking. Next is about sexual orientation. How about the socio-economic status of a person and other specific characteristics that may fall on the term of diversity. Now, diversity recognizes specifically and values these differences. Understanding that the differences of people is not it's something that's not the problem, but actually enriches the experiences and perspectives and may provide better solution in the context of people in any organization. So looking at this specific slide that you are seeing here, diversity is actually a prerequisite for inclusion. And if we look at it, diversity is really accepting, recognizing, embracing the differences of each of the things that we just shared here, the things you can see here. Now, inclusion, from how you can see it, it's actually something that we do, or an action or a verb. It's how we actually create that environment that, number one, accepts each person's individual differences. And differences can be a lot of definitions, but it's really your ability to accept each person's differences. Imagine if you have 10 people in a team, it's embracing the 10 differences of each person that has in that specific team. Next, it really embraces and looks at and focuses on the strengths of individuals, strengths of each person in that group. Next, it really is about encouraging people to work together. It it says here encourages involvement, but it's really more on making sure that the environment you have is open enough or safe so that people with diverse backgrounds would actually be involved, like in one specific project, two or three specific different projects that they would like to work together. Next is the good thing about inclusion is it really provides opportunities for all people to achieve their full potential. This is actually a good effect of having a diverse group working together and having the energy of inclusion. And once we have that energy of inclusion, it can really give opportunities to different people to achieve their full potential. So we have to share with you more on the power of diversity and inclusion. There was a study that Deloitte did, and what they shared is that when they looked at the differences between, or connection, I mean, between diversity and inclusion and their business performance, what they have noticed that when there is high diversity and low inclusion, or low diversity and high inclusion, the business outcomes were never as impressive compared to high diversity and high inclusion combination. So think about that. Maybe in a quick chat, can you share with me how come that this is actually something that happened? And they actually put a number. There's a 80% uplift when both conditions were high, when there's high diversity and high inclusion combination. Anyone who would like to share their thoughts with this one, you type in the chat box. Feel free so that I can read it. Going once, going twice. Okay. Now, okay, so while maybe some of you are still typing, what we can actually see here is the direct proportion of the power of diversity and inclusion towards business performance. It's the differences and accepting the strengths of each individual that has an impact on the business performance of any organization. And this is something that what we like on the study that Deloitte has done, because it has proven the power of diversity and inclusion. Now, let's look at the power of teams. No, so when we look at specific teams, diverse teams are actually smarter and they are more innovative compared to teams who are not as diverse compared to diverse specific teams. So experiments in Texas and Singapore said that they found individuals who are part of diverse teams were 58% more likely to improve the stocks of what? organization. Homogeneous groups were more prone to errors. Another study said analyzing levels of gender diversity, especially in research and development teams from 4,277 companies in Spain, found that companies with more women were more likely to introduce radical new innovations into market over a 2-year period. Next, a study of pooled data on 7,615 firms said that people who participated in the 2015 London Annual Business Survey showed that business run by culturally diverse leadership teams were more likely to develop new innovative products than those with homogeneous leadership. And one of the important factor here is that what people bring into the table, even to the mindset of people working together, is that the more diverse they are, the more information or data that that team can actually receive and process, so that when they work together, they can actually produce more information that they can analyze and say, maybe this is a good path for us to take, or maybe this is another path that we can actually take. So that's the effect of having a diverse team. Next one. There are actually primary and secondary dimensions to diversity. There is a primary dimension and there are secondary dimensions. So for example, with primary dimensions, we can easily look at or easily say age, ethnicity, gender, a person's physical abilities or a person's qualities, a person's race, and a person's sexual orientation. Something that is primary and something that can easily be identified by just probably asking a person or by looking at them. What are secondary dimensions? Secondary dimensions are specific dimensions that has an effect on diversity, but sometimes we always have to deep dive more to get to know the person so that we will understand the differences of this specific type of group. What is this? Educational background, geographic location, socioeconomic status, marital status. Probably some of the people will have military experience, even their parental status, a person's religious beliefs, and last is their thinking styles and political ideology. So that is something that can hit. Next, so attribution research, and what they actually notice first is that a lot of people identify easily when it comes to race, gender, ability or disability of a person, and actually their appearance. So by having this one, we have to be aware that by looking at people, there are certain tendencies that we might do. And when I say do, it really depends on how you were brought up, how you were, how you look at specific things, and it's really about your perception. So let's do a quick activity. And you can do this on your own, and you don't really have to answer on the chat box, but do this specific activity in your own space. So I'm going to share with you each slide, and on each slide you can choose one of the pictures and think about why did you choose that picture. Okay, the first one is about if you will choose your next boss, who would you choose? The person on the left side or the person on the right side? Okay, next, let's look at this one. How about when you need to choose your team member? So if you will be given a chance to choose only 3 people in this picture, only 3, who would you be choosing? This guy in his blue tie, this guy with a pink shirt, this guy in the wheelchair, this woman here wearing a blazer, and another woman here who is actually standing and looking calm. who would be your next team member if you will be choosing to? Okay, now let's look on the next one. So the next one, if you are given a chance, for example, you're going to ride a plane and you will be given a chance to choose a person who will be flying the plane, who would you choose to be your pilot? Only one, choose one. Hey, thank you. So the activity that we just did right now actually triggered something in our brains. And we have to understand more on why did our brain choose those specific pictures that I ask you to choose. So we have to look at how our brain works. And whenever we need to make a decision, for example, if it's a quick decision, most of the time our brain takes shortcuts and we make specific decisions most of the time. I'm not saying all the time, but most of the time based on certain experiences we have that are already in an unconscious level. So each area of the brain gives a certain level of impulse that helps us make our decisions. It is taught, especially in emotional intelligence, for us to be able to manage the area of this brain, or sometimes we call this the reptilian portion of the brain, and assess all about the information that we are getting, or even the emotion that we're getting, so that our prefrontal cortex can analyze and actually make the decision on the next steps that we need to do. So, with the activity that just happened, if you were given a chance to do this again, and let's say, oh, in 2 seconds, choose your next boss, then here, then here, a lot of the process will happen in shortcuts. And those shortcuts are based on our own experiences. And because it's really all about perception. So when we look at perception, what is really perception? So perception is really a communication that is impacted by how or what our brains perceive. And once our brains perceive that, then they interpret it. It interprets whatever information it gets. And from there, our brain is automatically to organize whatever data it gets, and it organizes it quickly. It keeps our perceptions consistent, and of course, connected to the physical reality based on what we are actually feeling at that specific moment. Our brain also uses what it knows. So we talk about a series of filters, things that we need to do to interpret anything that's happening in real life. And we don't really have to consciously think about it because it happens automatically. Another thing that we would like to add is that any communication situation involves at least two people having a discussion or having a quick talk to each other. And by having those specific conversations, we unconsciously have a filtering process. And that filtering process, if we are not very self aware on how we speak and we just speak automatically, sometimes that filtering process may lead to some miscommunication due to our own biases, our stereotypes, and maybe further influencing what another person can see or hear. So that's the important area that we also have to watch out. Next, that we also have to look at when we talk about diversity and inclusion is culture. So, what is culture? So, when we look at culture, culture is basically what? A system of shared meanings based upon a group of knowledge, beliefs, and values. Sometimes they call it morals and customs and the ways of doing. Most of the time, this is about a certain group, not just by a country or not just by a big organization, but even for some people or even for a small group of people. A culture is always about shared meanings. It's always about something that is common within everyone within that circle. So sometimes in Filipino, they sometimes call it what? I don't know, an inside joke. Or that sometimes that we understand if there's an inside joke, that's part of the culture. So characteristics of cultural groups what may include a common way of life shared by almost all members of a group. So what do I say? Common way of life. Here in our country or in this country that I'm staying in right now is that if you go to a particular city, let's say a well-off city, you would really see that there is a way of being of people that is living in that specific location. However, if you go to another location in the same country with a different way of life, you would notice that there is sometimes a huge gap on how people live in one city compared to another person who is living in a more diverse type of environment. Another thing that we also have to look at is a shared sense of history. Is this group of people went through not just the same thing, but actually remembers the same thing that happens to them? And this is also important when we talk about shared sense of history. Because later when we talk about generation differences, there is actually a shared sense of history for each of the generations that we have. Next is our ability to shape behavior and perceptions of members. So what is culture is also the ability to shape the people that's part of that group. What are their basics? What are their basic assumptions? What would these people put a price point or a premium in the services that they do? Or sometimes what are the things that they take for granted? So it is that type of environment that also allows people to be part of that certain level of culture. However, people in different cultures or in different groups, there is a backlash. And sometimes there is a tendency for us to be understood, not by people in that group, but necessarily by, if we quote unquote the word everyone, if we include everyone, because of that specific culture, terms and concepts understood by that specific culture may not be understood by other groups as well. Another thing is culture is very strong. It is very slow to actually change. Next that we would like to share with everyone is about values. So what is values? So values by American Management Association's definitions that values is actually the quality, belief, principle, or a standard that is regarded as useful, desirable, or worthwhile to an individual or a specific group. That's why in our organization, values is very important for us to create. If you are starting an organization, we have to be clear with what will be the core values of the company, what will be the core values of the specific group, because this is the one of the important areas that embraces that level of sameness of that organization. Next is values also is different for everyone. So each of us has different set of values. And those values may be important to me, but maybe not as important to you. So when I did some values training before, one of my main core value is about fairness. And I believe that if the concept of fairness is removed in a group of people, organization, or even a person, sometimes I have that tendency of I need to work on myself to be able to connect with this person more. Another thing that helps though is that even though we may have a different set of values, if I see that this person or this group accepts my value, then I can connect with them better. Next is our values actually develop early in life because our values, or especially our core values, is mostly affected by our experiences, the way we were brought up, where we study, the people that we hang out with, the very main experiences that you will not forget. These are sometimes, or most of the time, shape how we look at things and value, and mostly it becomes one of our core values. Okay, given that we are talking about values as well in culture, we really want to share with you that sometimes in cultures there are three primary area of differences. And what are those differences? Time, how we look at specific activities, and our orientation to groups or relationships. So let's look at some different cultural values. So if we talk about orientation to time, there are some specific group that would like to talk about more on what happened in the past so that it can shape their future. There are people who are more focused on staying in the present because for them, they found that being in the present is being of value. Some people or some groups may be more focused on looking at the future because some people would like to see looking at the future is more of a future pacing type of attitude for them, or maybe being more proactive. So that is for their orientation in time. If we talk about orientation to activities, there might be some groups of people that would like to have more formal meetings rather than informal meetings. So there are people that when it when it comes to a set of group of people that will be connecting together like a big group, there are people who would prefer a formal way of meeting with each other, like a big event. An informal meeting is more of like people that feel comfortable when I don't really have to wear a suit and a tie to go into a specific event and just be who I am and just have a drink, glass of water, have coffee, and just meet with people. Another thing is about clock time orientation and event time. So this is about the time. So there are people who are more focused on if I say it's 5 o'clock, it's 5 o'clock. There are some people who say let's just meet in the afternoon, and they're more free and say let's see where it goes. So there are more people who need to have more structure, and there are more people who would rather have an objective of a specific time that they would meet, like just in the afternoon. Depends. Another thing that we look at cultural values is the differences on where we put our attention to is task versus relationship. There are groups of people who value the people that they work with because they see that having better connections with the people that they work with are more focused for them or more, let's say, important to them. Another one set of people would say, no, it's really about the task. I love doing specific tasks. And when I meet people who just focus on the task, makes me more connected with them or makes me more focused on the things that I need to do. That's for the task. And there's also another one we look at is the orientation to relationships. And what are orientation to relationships? You can also think about this yourself. When it comes to relationships, some people prefer to look at things individually rather than a group. So individually means it is really focused on I, meaning I need to make sure that everything in my space is set so that when I connect to other people, I can be clear on who I am when I meet them. When we talk about group, it's not really about an I, but it's about the we. Now, these are two specific mindsets that's very important. One is not more valuable than the other. It only says that this is how this specific group values specific orientation when it comes to relationship. When it comes to I, then we have to understand that this is what's important to him, her, or them. For a group, it's really more on rather than focusing on my own strengths, my own capacity, let's look at the ability of the whole group and as we so that we can achieve a common goal. Differences in sports when we look at relationship is that people who love to play sports that are more eye oriented, meaning like tennis, badminton, bowling, rather than group. And when we say group, it's like a team sport, basketball, volleyball, dragon boat racing. Those are the areas when we talk about relationships. Now, in another aspect is about equality versus status earned. So there are certain cultural groups that would like to focus on equality, meaning when one person works hard that is part of that group, everyone in that group achieves that level of finesse. Status earned is they believe that people would have more value if they really work on their own specific space or their self to achieve a certain goal. Another thing with relationships if is about how high or context high is a person or how low context high is a person. So when we say context high is really about understanding the person's main value in life. So if saying context high, I am more focused on really achieving achieving my own field in a specific area. I'm a martial artist. So for me, Context High would focus more on my own skill sets in terms of being a better martial artist and really understanding what value would it bring to the table compared to low context. If I say low context type of cultural, it's not really about being the good or great person who knows a lot of things regarding that specific martial art, but it's really being part of that specific group only. So that's about cultural values. So the easiest way for us to have a deeper understanding on diversity and inclusion is really looking at what's very evident around us. And usually they talk about age. And when we talk about age, before it's really a very hard concept to talk about. But as the generations move, and now we are in 2024, this is a topic that is very much clear now to everyone. So this is the best example that we can use diversity and inclusion about the generations. So as we can see, there are different generations that still exist in the workplace. Here are the baby boomers. Some of people call them Generation X. There are people who are called the millennials. And last that is part of this group right now, and the working group is actually the Generation Z. Okay. So, or Gen Z, they call them the Gen Z type of people. So each generation has their specific differences. And this specific differences, so maybe all of us are familiar with each of the generations' differences, but to quickly understand each of the areas is if we look at the baby boomers, mostly they're born from 1946 to 1964. And this is what I said that there is a common history on people with culture. So with baby boomers, their formative life experiences is really more about the Cold War, Vietnam, moon landing, Woodstock, communal living. In the Philippines, it is the main historic events that happened between 1946 that people would actually remember. In work, what they value in work is what? Titles, the name that they have with their position. They're really focused on retirement plans, meaning they want to set up their future based on how they do their work right now. Work frustration, they don't like to be feel dismissed, especially by other generations. Mostly from baby boomers, their one word is optimistic. And if we will make a motto for them, they said that large organizations provide whole careers. FaceTime in one office, in the office, they live to work actually to provide for their family, and they really work hard. They work not just for their own, they work hard for their families. So they work hard for their work, they work hard for their education, and they work hard to achieve success. Next is for the Generation X. So for the Generation X, these are the specific individuals who were born in 1965 between to 1981. Some people say 1982, but mostly Generation X, their formative life experiences is what? The introduction of PCs and video games, actually, and rising levels of divorce when it comes to their formative life experiences. Next, when it comes to work incentives, unlike the baby boomers, they're more focused on family, flexible schedules because of their family. They want to focus more on health insurance for some reason, because in this specific age, Generation X have a lot of illnesses that's happening in their body. They believe in what? Fairness in terms of work incentives. They like it to be equal and the consistency actually of their salaries and their pay. So what is their work frustration? Gen X would love to have freedom in terms of doing their work, so they don't like to have or experience micromanagement. Some of them don't like to be not being involved in certain projects that they see valuable, and or not being informed if there is a direction that needs to change in a certain project or in a certain movement in an organization. So one word for them, unlike the baby boomers who are optimistic, for them it's self-reliant. So what is their career motto? It is believed that their motto is more loyal to their profession, not to unemployed. So they're more focused on their identity in what they do in their work, not to their employer. They invest more time actually in having more portable career skills. Meaning, if ever something may happen here in one area that I'm working on, I can shift myself and do another thing. So it's really the start of the emergence of knowledge worker. However, compared to the baby boomers, they also work to live. So there's areas that they're to get the same. So Generation Y. So for people who actually were born between 1981 and the 2000, so their formative life experiences that they can really remember, that is also clear in their minds, is like the 9/11 disaster, the rise of global terrorism, the things that they watch in TV, games. When we talk about games, it's not video games, but game consoles, things that they can hold immediately. The rise of social media, reality TV, and the emergence of Google. So these are the formative life experiences that the Gen Y clearly remembers. So what is important for the Gen Y? Work incentives, flexible time. They really want to have flexible time, and it's really focused more on flexible time off. So the stresses of this specific generation that is experienced is different from the Gen X and the baby boomers. They would like to have cool perks like what? Travel opportunities. Same with Gen X though, they also want to have equal and consistent pay. However, with Gen Y, there is a difference in terms of focusing on promotional opportunities. They would like to get opportunities to have promotion. So sometimes with Gen Y, it's okay that I will go one down level for now because my main objective is to reach this specific position in the, let's say, in an organization or a company that they created. So what are their frustrations? Work frustrations, they don't like people not saying what they need to improve on, so they lack of feedback. Sometimes if people are condescending on the things that they do, or cynical colleagues. So with Gen Ys, it is more important in understanding that it's not just really about the work itself, but it's also the people that they work with. Mostly when we talk about millennials, they're often coined the term tech savvy because they are mostly the first generation who really had a chance to really deep dive and grow with some of the gadgets that we have right now. So mostly they're called tech savvy. It's seldom for you to see a millennial that is not familiar with using a computer or a phone. a smartphone. Career motto, they are the first digital career work people in organization. They more focus on how I do my work, because my work, the way I do my work may be different from the way you do your work. So it's really more of accepting that. And they really desire to have meaningful work. Another aspect that's for me personally is a little bit intriguing is the term multitask or die. So with the most of the generation Ys or the millennials have the perception or view that multitasking is very important in everyday life, because if not, they will not survive the stresses that our environment has. Next is about Generation Z. So the new ones, the new bloods, we call it in the office. So with Gen Zs, their formative life experiences is really about hearing that our economy is going down or keeps on going down. So it's really about economic downturn, the emergence of mobile devices, because most of the Gen Zs would not remember a time in their life that a smartphone did not exist. This is also the time where, as growing up, they hear a lot of topics on how to take care of the environment, improve the environment. So it's really about what? Taking care of the earth or environmental issues, focus on the environment. Another important area is about the emergence of WikiLeaks. And with Gen Z's, knowledge is already out there. So secrets are not as tight anymore. And there might be opportunities that secrets might just get out of the world easily, just like the WikiLeaks. So work incentives, mostly what is seen right now on how Gen Z's work is they also would like to find value in the work that they do, but they also would like to be appreciated by the people that they are working with, especially their bosses, but not necessarily as boss, but as an equal when they do their specific work. Another areas that we look at Gen Z's is that mostly Gen Zs have their own way of working, and there's actually a slang that some of millennials can understand, but not really all. But they are beginning to set the type of culture. One word that is usually not one word. I mean, let's look at the work frustration. So with the work frustration that Gen Z's has is that when it comes to not liking the work because it lacks innovation and the stimulation in the brain that they're getting in certain tasks that they do. So if it's redundant work or if it's a work that doesn't need a lot of creativity, sometimes they get bogged down by it. And most of the Gen Zs wouldn't like to have like brick and mortars, old school knowledge that's being shared with them, because like we said, knowledge is very accessible to them, unlike before that you need to go to the library, look for a specific book. For them, they just need to google it and it's already there. Career motto, there are the mobile workers moving with knowledge to where knowledge is valued most, and mostly they really value privacy. So if you look at certain Gen Zs, they have their computers, especially their cameras, covered. So sometimes they see some millennials do it, but mostly Gen Zs, they really like that to be covered because they value their privacy. So looking at the differences, there are some areas that we have to look at because there are cultural generalizations versus some cultural stereotypes. So what we are sharing with you here is what is happening sometimes in the mind. So what is cultural generalization? Cultural generalization is not actually applied to everyone in actually all groups. What happens is that sometimes people tend to discard some important areas, sometimes not as important, when determined it is no longer useful or accurate. So for cultural stereotypes, it's really more applied to everyone, especially in the group and especially in all situations. They retained long after it is no longer accurate or applicable in the group. So looking at all of this, so the cultural generalizations and cultural stereotypes, there are some areas that we look at the generations that might be a cultural generalization, or maybe it's a cultural stereotype. Kaya nga sometimes a cultural stereotype, so when you talk to a millennial, mostly ang tawag sa kanila entitled. Minsan ganun. Sometimes it's looked that way. However, we really have to be aware on the differences of what are the specific things that we generalize in a culture, or sometimes what are the specific stereotypes that we have. And it all boils down because of the bias that we actually have with people. So bias. So what is bias? So bias is an assumption or a belief or prejudice about a category of people that may be a blind spot for us. So a while ago when we did the activity of choosing the picture, um who do you want to be your boss, who do you want to be part of your team, or even choosing a pilot, sometimes there are biases that's happening with us. And what are those specific biases? There are different types of bias. I'm not sure if all of you are familiar, but there is actually around 5 different biases that is happening, especially when we want to make a decision. Now, what is the first one? It's actually an affinity bias. So from the word affinity, it is actually being attracted to something that you find positive. And when you find something positive, it is most of the time common with people that you see that have a lot of common with you. So yeah, so you are being positively attracted to people with whom you share a common bond. So what is affinity bias? Sometimes we hear this like, are you part of this certain group? Oh, I do this specific training. Oh, I do this specific exercise with you. I do badminton. Those areas can be an area for affinity bias. What is difference from affinity bias from similarity bias? Similarity bias is wanting to spend time with others just like us. So people who share the same or similar values, thoughts, and beliefs. So if we are going to look at ourselves when we hang out with specific people, why do we hang out with those specific people? Sometimes because we want to spend time with others who are just like us because we may feel more comfortable. Another challenging thing, though, about bias is that there is what we call conformational bias. Conformational bias is people that sometimes when they hear a topic or when they hear an idea, they would always like to double check and seek if the facts would actually set into their minds as well, if it's something that they would really accept. So confirmational bias is seeking facts that will confirm to your pre-existing beliefs. So what is the hindsight bias? A hindsight bias is people sometimes that you are just saying an idea and they immediately know what you're going to say. As I know that already. So you don't have to finish your sentence. I know what you mean. Sometimes it's what we call a hindsight bias. So you know it all along effect. There's another bias that is might not be clear for everyone, but there's also a bias that's called distance bias or a recency bias. So what is this? It is something that has happened lately that would have an impact to you greatly, so you put more attention to that. Or there is something that is far away from you that you bring your attention away from that. So distance bias and recency bias is really more focused on you would like to have more connection with certain things that you do that is nearer to you than far away. So that's distance bias and recency bias. Okay. Now, with our topic in diversity and inclusion, if we do not act on those specific biases that we have, diversity and inclusion may have a harder time to actually be achieved. So we have to be clear with the biases that we have. Each individual in this room has different biases, and we have to embrace and understand and be self-aware of those differences and biases, because those biases may hinder us from accepting other people in terms of who they are and what are they really capable of doing. So what we want to share with you is that there are some skills that we can do so that we can be more culturally competent and embrace diversity and inclusion. So some areas here is about your own self-knowledge. How would you be able to improve your own self-knowledge in terms of the differences of people that you're working with or the groups that you would be exposed to? Your ability to self-regulate and self-manage. First, are you able to watch your thoughts, those um hidden words or those words that you hear behind your back? Next is another thing is let the power of logic override your primitive brain. You know when to pause. If you feel that there's a certain bias happening with you, learn how to pause. So what is that pause button in you? Some people would say it's breathing. Some people would say step backward. Some people would say they close their eyes. It's really up to you. Something that's an additional that can also help you is act as if that the bias doesn't exist. So when you come in and you notice that your bias is happening, learn how to let it go and say, it's just there on the side. It can exist, or maybe better for some of us is it doesn't exist in this specific conversation. Use specific measurable behaviors that run counter to our biases. Sometimes this is a technique that people call reframing. So if you have a certain level of bias, you try to reframe it and go the other direction to look at it differently. Other skills that we actually can do to improve us in becoming more culturally competent and embrace diversity and inclusion is our own interpersonal sensitivity. How sensitive can we be to other people? How sensitive can we work on understanding how people feel? Those are the areas that we can look at. Cultural sensitivity. If I know that this specific group of people or specific race acts this way, how would I be able to adjust myself to understand those specific differences? Another important area that is crucial, and ako personally, it's very important for me, is empathy. Building your empathy is one of the important areas for us to be able to accept the differences in people, understanding what the other person is going through. So aside from empathy, it's flexibility, your ability to shift your moods, your ideas in terms of what you are hearing. How flexible can you be in certain situations? Learning to adjust. Next is your curiosity. Instead of saying this is not how it happens or this is not how it is being done, you can be more curious and see, let's see if this can work and let's see where can this go. Be more curious. And last is tolerance for ambiguity. If there are certain topics that you may find too general or too not really clear for you, be more tolerant in ambiguity. Embrace the ambiguity. Why? Because the ambiguity is making you think better and embrace that. Embrace that situation. There. So last that we wanted to share with you is the topic that I put a little bit of emphasis a while ago is empathy. So one of the areas that we really need to develop on ourselves to be able to embrace diversity and inclusion is our power to be more empathetic to the things or to the people that we're working with. Empathy is the feeling that you understand another person's experience and emotions, and actually for you to be able and really identify to share someone's else feelings. Now, when we look at empathy, from definition, some people say it's putting yourself on another person's shoes. But really, empathy is not just about that. Empathy, it's knowing when to be there for the person, especially if they are experiencing some downsides in their life, or even upsides in their life, but is knowing when to be there and just being there for them. What they say here is that empathy is commonly um, misconstrued with sympathy, because sympathy is an action towards the feelings that you are experiencing, rather than embracing that feeling and identifying that this is what the person that you are talking to is experiencing, and you are also feeling it, and you are just letting that person go through that and let them grow. So that's the idea of empathy. Okay. So with that, if you become more empathetic and with everything that we shared with you, if I share with you the pictures again, so if you are going to choose your next boss, how would you now look at them? How would you now choose? You would now need to process more information for you to be able to make the decision that is fitting for you. Last is choose your pilot. So if you will have a chance to choose your pilot, what would now be your own way of identifying who would be the best pilot for you? And with that, thank you everyone. That is a quick journey of our topic of how to build a thriving team and understanding diversity and inclusion role in the workplace. Does any one of you have any questions?
Hi, Kelvin.
Hi,
Hi, I have a question, Kelvin.
thank you.
In
Sige.
the sample that you presented, particularly at Deloitte,
Mhm.
regarding the spike in productivity, uh, is there a study with regard to a question on how happy are the people in that particular organization,
That is
wherein diversity and inclusion is being primarily practiced?
okay. Honestly, that is a very good question. To be honest, I don't know how to answer that, but what they have shared with us is how diversity affected on a team's business performance. But I believe that there will be studies outside from what Deloitte has done that can actually answer your specific question. But that's a very interesting question. How happy are the people when it comes to diverse teams?
Kasi when
Yes.
we're talking about the different, well, of course, the primary characteristics and then the secondary one, particularly with regard to political views or something like that, definitely there will always be uh, differing opinions in certain
Yes.
matters. So in essence, when there are discussions, particularly with regard to handling issues that would benefit an employee, this matters in a way would affect those exchange of ideas.
Yes.
And if that will be the case, okay, I understand that there's a possibility of productivity because you are able to share what you know, particularly in relation to your political views or affiliations or other factors related to that. But I think what is missing in relation to that is that uh, how people are adapting in
I
those
see.
kinds of environment wherein diversity is really abound. So that's the reason why I asked that question.
I think if I'm going to share with you a perspective on this specific topic, is that one of the reasons why one of the final thoughts that we wanted to share with everyone is the thought of empathy, is because when people begin to develop their side of being empathetic to other people's differences and making them under to have the sense of understanding the other person's shoes, it gives them a more sense of belongingness and more sense of acceptance on the difference of people. So in certain situations, if there might be an encounter where differences are very strong, but if people are empathetic in that specific group, then it can be an opportunity for them to have a better way of working, right? Rather than just focuses on the business performance. But with empathy, it really helps people to become more engaged with one another. That's why it can boost happiness if you develop that side of you. Any thoughts?
Um, Thank you for that perspective. I'll
Yeah.
take into consideration that. Okay.
Anyone
Hi,
else?
Bruno. Yeah, Bruno
Hey,
here
Bruno. Hi,
from
Bruno.
Ismay. Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for your presentation. There is one thing I'd like to. I'm with Ferlin here from the HR department, and we you're one of the last slides where you mentioned about ambiguity. I think you need to define ambiguity. Ambiguity is uh, can is has a very negative meaning, and especially you consider ambiguity politicians, for example, or imagine also ambiguity in your code of conduct company. If your code of conduct is not clearly defined and has ambiguity, it can lead to a lot of interpretations.
Yes.
And you know what I mean? So to
Yes,
me,
yes.
that's my only comment on your
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank
Can you
you.
please define ambiguity?
Okay, so the way we define or this specific material define ambiguity is that ambiguity on how it can positively impact a workplace in a way that it can foster number one creativity, adaptability, and probably collaboration. So how does it do that? So there are certain organizations or tasks that we do that need to have clear and specific things that needs to be defined, right? But there are certain areas that ambiguity needs to be used or embraced, like specific work that needs to encourage creativity and innovation for group. Because if we give them a set of steps to follow, definitely this will not work with a production company that needs to follow step 1 to 10 for them to achieve equality. But there are certain organizations that would need a certain level of ambiguity so that it can encourage creativity and innovation. Next is it can actually promote flexibility and adaptability because in my mind an ambiguous environment helps our employees to learn more on a specific situation so that they can number one adapt quickly on the certain changes, especially in a VUCA or a banning environment. They can be more flexible in terms of working with people that they have, especially in a team. It actually builds more resilience because having a sense of ambiguity in some things that we do can help the team help find solutions unexpectedly and sometimes very effectively. It also enhances people's problem solving skills. It can help foster collaboration because ambiguity can create a sense of team dynamics within the group that they need to help each other for them to achieve a certain goal. It can also increase employee engagement if you set a little area of ambiguity. But what I want to share here is it doesn't apply to all organizations, especially for organizations that would require really step-by-step processes or even accounting or tax, those specific areas. But there are certain things in an organization that we can do that we can have a certain level of ambiguity for the person's growth or for the employee's growth.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. Thanks for this explanation. It's clearer now. I would because again, it doesn't apply to all businesses. And then one example is food industry. You can't tolerate ambiguity there because
Yes.
you have to follow the process, right? Otherwise,
Yes.
you're prone to disaster. But
Yes.
I would replace what you um, use it was tolerance for ambiguity. I would probably replace that if I had to do presentation by embrace flexibility you mentioned or
Yes.
initiative. For me,
Okay.
I think that's what you mean. Is that correct? Initiatives.
Um, with I want to look at the definition. So from the presentation, what they really added there is the tolerance for ambiguity, because I think that's what that's their main intention that not all organizations would have to be set in stones in their steps. But I like what you've said about having the initiative. With having the initiative, it gives them a better understanding to be more proactive in the things that they need to do, especially in certain levels of difficult problems that their organization needs to accomplish. So I'm looking at this specific area that you are asking. But what I noticed from the definition itself, because like I said a while ago with ambiguity, it has a positive impact on the workplace because it can foster definitely by creativity, adaptability, and collaboration. So we have to be particular on those specific areas in the organization that needs that. Lastly, for me to add to that is it can also we really need to focus on the type of work that the organization does. So if the type of the organization would require people to be more creative or even require a little level of agility and responsiveness, then you need to have that certain number of ambiguity so that people can play around. Maybe the term there is initiative, yes, but also maybe having a clear boundary on where people can actually play. So that's another area that we can look at. But thank you for your insight. That's it. Okay. And with that, thank you, everyone. I love your questions. It will be taken into account for, especially looking at what we had just have shared with you. And with that, thank you, everyone, for listening. And hopefully you learned something from this program or just learned something new today. And with that, thank you, everyone. And back to you, Al.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks. Thank you, Bruno.
Yes, thank you so much, Kelvin, and also to all of the participants we have this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. But before we let you go, I know it's a bit over time already. We would just like to ask for your feedback also. Um, if you have any suggestions, if you would like to extend your learning journey with us regarding this one, because this pre-webinar is actually from our one of our open enrollment programs called Leading in a Diverse, Equitable, and Inclusive Culture. So it will happen on July 23 to 24. It's virtually done through Zoom as well. This is just actually just a tip of the workshop that we have. It's just the foundational parts of it. But we will get to have more explanations and learnings on the actual 2-day program. So if you want to join that, you can definitely reach out to us through our email and website. As flashed on the screen. You can also get in touch with us through our Facebook page, LinkedIn page, and yeah, for our emails, that is solution@quintegral.com. And yeah, and for the feedback, we have here the QR code. Please do let us know how this webinar went for you. We would love to know what other topics you'd like to have for the other future webinars that we will be having. Thank you so much and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.